this idea of what systems innovation means in the context of organizations. And today we're going to get a kind of high level overview of that, talking about systems innovation itself, and then getting our hands first iteration on what this might mean in the context of organizations and changing organizations. So this is our first board. I'll share this link with you. You can jump in here whenever you're ready. In about 10 minutes or so, I'll be asking you to share your own thinking. So when you're ready, you can join here. Maybe I'll just find this board for you. Copy link. Okay, I think we're ready to get started now. Here we go then. So what is systems innovation? That's the first board here. I'm actually going to talk a little bit firstly about this history of ideas. So systems innovation is a very new idea. As you can see on my screen here, it's maybe only 10, 20 years old. But of course, the ideas of systems thinking go way back into the early to mid 20th century. After the Second World War, they started emerging ideas of systems science. And systems innovation is really an extension of that massive new set of thinking and ideas that came about middle, late 20th century and have evolved in the 21st century and today give us systems innovation. So if we go back here, this is just a rough kind of schema, rough kind of diagram to kind of structure our thinking a little bit. We can see systems thinking was the original idea, and it's by far the most well-known idea. Right, it's much more popular than the term complexity science or systems change or systems innovation. So a couple of ideas that have kind of contributed to this in that history we can see up on the top there, ideas out there in society and relating to organizations, initial thinking around systems thinking and management, stuff around wicked problems, limits to growth, the fifth discipline, leverage points, agile, networked organizations. These are all ideas that have developed in power over the course of the 20th century. Down on the bottom, we can see more science, technical ideas, cybernetics, system science, graph theory, nonlinear systems, network science. Maybe you're familiar with some of these terms, but that's a little bit of the evolution of ideas, and systems innovation exists in that context. Here's another way of looking at it. Kind of structuring, this is a big community of systems thinkers. And one way of thinking about kind of what that community looks like out there is kind of structuring along the lines of academic versus applied, or the spectrum from those people who are more theoretical and academic in their thinking, and those who are more out there in the world doing stuff and applied. And then top to bottom goes technical to non-technical. So down here, we have these complexity scientists. They're obviously academic. Science is a pretty academic activity. Down here, they're quite technical, right? It's based on mathematics and so forth. You may have heard of a lot of ideas there: self-organization, information theory, network science, computational science, agent-based modeling. That's generally, we could call it science of complexity. Up here, still on the side of academic, kind of theoretical, we have the systems thinking stuff, but it's more non-technical. A lot of stuff there around emergence, holism, adaptive systems, and so on. And then over here, we have systems change, which is a more applied thing. It's about how to take these ideas and apply them to actually trying to change systems out there in the world, often thinking about kind of sustainability challenges, transitions, wicked problems, systems mapping, systems leadership. And then down here, stuff around systems design. It's a little bit more technical, but it's applied. It's trying to change things out there in the world. A lot of ideas around design thinking, sustainable design, agile, human-centered design, so on and so forth. So that's a little bit the cosmos of ideas that systems innovation exists within and kind of inherits. It's all this system stuff, but then it's kind of mashing that up with the idea of innovation and what that looks like. So to get specifically to what systems innovation is, this is Frank Giels, who's a prominent researcher, Dutch researcher at the University of Manchester. And I think he came up with one of the kind of quickest, most succinct definitions of what we're talking about here in terms of systems innovation. So he says, what is systems innovation? I'd suggest that it's about changes in the way we fulfill societal functions. So how the society fulfills mobility or energy or food or entertainment or healthcare. So it's about a change in socio-technical systems, a shift from one system, from one energy system, from one food system, from one health system to another. So it's a very interesting way of thinking about it, talking about it, societal functions, and how society organizes itself and fulfills the functions that it needs to fulfill, whether that's food, whether that's energy, whether that's healthcare or whatever it may be. And then systems innovation is how we change the way that we fulfill those functions, how we change the systems that provide the functions that fulfill our needs in society. Of course, that takes a whole wide variety of different systems. So this is one example of a system here. One example of these societal systems function.
Jos, could you, sorry, there is a lot of background noise, actually. I don't know if it's you, Jos, or someone else. It's already in the chat mentioned as well. Could you perhaps mute everyone? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, let me see there. What's the best option to do that? Yeah, 1 second.
Okay, now we are solved.
Yeah, maybe it's background from me. I'm not sure, Christopher, but if everybody else could mute, that would be the best we can do, I think, for the moment. So this here is, let's say, a political system, and this is fulfilling a certain societal function. How we make decisions collectively, how we manage the public sphere. This is a certain function that all societies need fulfilled. And we have a certain way of doing that, right? There's a certain system for doing that in modern societies, modern nation states. We live in, many of us, in representative democracies. So we elect people, they go into buildings like this, they make decisions about the public sphere. And that system, like many other industrial systems, has a certain pattern to it, has a certain centralized approach, a certain way of doing things. It's often supported by a certain mentality. So that's an example of one system. There's many others. We'll talk more about those. But one of the challenges we face there is this kind of rise of complexity. And that a lot of these kinds of organizations are stalling, these industrial systems. The way we did things in the industrial age is stalling in many ways. So is the background still loud, Christopher? Is it me or is it okay? It's okay.
Yeah, it still is. There's a lot of
Okay.
noise in the background.
Yeah, sorry, maybe I'll have to change location. Sorry about this.
There is one user who's not, one other user who's not muted. If we could all mute, that would be great, and just allow Josh to speak. Thank you.
I think it's Josh, though. I think it's his background noise.
Sorry about that. Should be a bit better now. Okay, so we talk about the rise of complexity. This is a lot how the story is kind of told. We have an industrial age set of institutions, of organizations, of ways of organizing, and this rise of complexity in the world is really presenting kind of fundamental challenges to that. And that's where a lot of the need for this systems approach comes from, and the need for systems innovation. We can see here, Dr. Cabrera puts it like this. He said, wicked problems, all these kind of complex challenges we face in the world are really emerging from the kind of mismatch between the ways we're organizing, the ways we're looking at the world, and the kind of increasingly complex world we live in. So that's the kind of context as to why we need systems innovation, to make that kind of transition into a more complex world, complex ways of organizing. So systems innovation can be understood as a combination of systems thinking and the process of innovation so as to enable that kind of transformational change that's needed to be more adapted to this kind of networked complex environment. So the argument goes, so it's this combination of new ways of thinking and new ways of organizing to fulfill societal functions in new ways. There's many different kind of systems there, as I mentioned. It could be manufacturing, it could be finance, it could be education. It's shifting from something that we know at the moment, that we recognize, those kind of the particular way that we do education, the particular way that we do manufacturing and so forth, and trying to move to a new model. So that's the general idea of systems innovation. And I think this kind of captures it a lot, this shift from a linear approach to change, a linear approach to how we do things, how we think, to how we organize, to a non-linear approach. I think this graphic captures it very well. We know a linear approach to change. It's based upon simplifying assumptions that the system we're dealing with is knowable, predictable, and controllable. Because of this, we can specify the desired outcomes of the system. We can make these statements about reduce poverty by 20%, increase revenue, or so on. We can then plan out the change process through a series of stages where we control the parts so as to move forward in a stable and predictable fashion towards the desired goal. That's a linear approach to change. Systems innovation is a non-linear approach to change. It hinges around the integration of networks and the emergence of new system structures and functionality. Here we do not specify outcomes, but instead invest in changing the system structure by creating new connections, alignment between the parts, integration and synergies, so as to realize the emergence of an overall state, a new overall state in the system that renders the old system no longer relevant. So you can see it's a very fundamentally kind of different approach to doing things. Actually, it's a different approach to change, a different approach to organizing. It takes a very different way of thinking about what we're doing and so forth. So that's systems innovation. And we're here to talk about it in the context of organizations. What does this mean for how we organize ourselves? And that's looking at that same kind of dynamic, right? How do we move from a linear kind of world to a non-linear world, a non-linear approach? First question is, what does this linear approach look like? I'd like you to join me now on the Miro board and start doing a little bit of ideating on that in terms of you guys posting up some of the characteristics model to organizations, something we should be familiar with. We can think about it along these different dimensions: strategy, governance, operations. How do we get alignment?
Can you share the link?
How do we do change? I will do. Yep. I'll share the link directly to this board. Hopefully we're all familiar with Miro. If you need help, just give me a shout. So I found this an interesting quote about how we currently organize ourselves and how this particular approach came to dominate organizations. This is a professor from NUY. He says, over the 19th and 20th century, the world's economy in many countries reorganized in a way in which hierarchies of increasing complexity were created and started to dominate how people made a living and how the world's goods and services were produced. So it's going back to that idea that there's a certain pattern through which we coordinate ourselves. So by the end of the 20th century, 5 out of 6 people who made a living in the United States did so by working full-time for a hierarchical company. It became the dominant mode of how we earn a living. It became the dominant mode of how the world's goods and services were produced. So this is what it might look like. And I want you guys to post up, tell me what you think this is like along all these different dimensions. You grab a sticky here, plunk it down and type in what does strategy look like in this kind of organization? What is operations? How do we get alignment? What's the structure? How does change take place? Does everybody know how to use Miro? Okay, please mute yourself also.
Mhm. Una volta all'inizio mi era più difficile capire come funziona.
Vedi, questi sono bravissimi. Infatti non capisco come muovermi.
Però alzavo tanti dopo per io al tuo computer, non lo so.
Okay, let's take a look at some of these. So in terms of alignment, how do we get alignment within the linear form of organization that we know today? The organism, top down, force of personality. What do we mean by this? Who posted this? Force of personality. Anyone? Force of personality? Remember, you have to unmute yourself before you talk. Power alliance through formal structures. Who posted this? Formal structures.
John here, I posted the formal structures. It's usually by having formal meetings at a certain time every month, report writing, and trying to get people together in a structured way rather than an informal way. So through the hierarchy kind of stuff, through managers.
Yeah. It's also kind of synchronized too, like people getting together in a meeting, people all getting together, getting a message from a central kind of entity and then executing rather than maybe in a kind of decentralized, potentially asynchronous way, which would be another way of doing it. We can talk about that in a bit. Operations, orders, project, documentation. Actually, we don't really have alignment. Who posted this? Catechisms. Okay, so structure. The structure's in silos. It's a pyramid structure. Information bottlenecks. Separation of people, working groups, projects, creating clusters. The hippo, highest paid person in the room. Anybody want to talk about hippos? Who posted this? Waiting for the boss to approve. Hierarchical, horizontal, often aligned with org structure. Clear boundaries, cascading information. Who posted this?
I did. I did.
Hmm.
I
What
find,
do you mean
yeah,
by
I find that in a hierarchical structure, what really happens is that the layer above is expected to cascade the information below. And that then creates the bottleneck. So that layer above really becomes a node for transferring information and therefore a bottleneck.
So it's what this person said down here, bottleneck.
Yeah.
And isn't there also another factor of information loss, don't you think?
Loss, yeah.
Like, when there's a continuous cascading of information, it's like this person says it and then it goes to another and they interpret one way and it goes to another and they interpret, and in a way it can get very corrupted by the time it gets all the way down to,
yeah, there is that concept in that. Yeah, definitely.
And also lose context too. Like a person said it here in a certain context, and then it cascades down, and another person gets it in a very different context over there. Tightly knitted cliques of elites, top down with a big water head. Top down with a big water head. Who is this?
It's me, Sabine. That's something that I noticed working with organizations. At a certain time, I had this generative process, and when somebody from this organization talked to me about the structure, I had this picture of this huge waterhead, which are actually really just a few people, but deciding for this huge mass of people that actually are not in power, but that are the ones that are supposed to do the big load of work. So
and that becomes a big problem when things get complex, isn't it? So you have a few people in the center, and you feed massive more and more information into the center, but their brains are still just the same size, and they're maybe not able to do it. What do you think's the outcome? What happens? What's the dysfunctionality that emerges because of that? How does it manifest itself, do you think?
Well, for me, it's this picture that is the big waterhead is completely detached. So there is no relationship and connection, and thus no alignment, and thus no movement forward, let's say. And that's what makes it slow in the sense.
And I guess decontextualized too. So maybe it's in a very, very broad, complex environment, and you've just got a few people, and they don't have so much intelligence, and they can only deal with 10, 20, maximum 50 kind of metrics that they're measuring for, when really they're dealing with this maybe vast, global enterprise. It could be this vast system of 100, 200,000 people around the planet interacting in all these different ways. You have these few people with their 20 metrics. And it becomes very decontextualized, doesn't it, as opposed to what's really going on out there.
Yeah, it's true.
So communication besides commands also primarily top to bottom information does not flow both ways. Sense-making constraint. Who is this?
That was me. And I think it kind of agrees what we've been hearing before in this discussion, that besides, we all know that, that commands come from top to bottom, but one of the things I used to say is if you wanted to keep something secret, tell it in a director's meeting because nobody will ever find out about it again. And that we don't have organizations when they are too overly hierarchical and top down. There's so many points of communication that it starts, it's like the telephone game where the organization as a whole doesn't really know what's going on. And I think that helps to contribute a lot of times to companies becoming disrupted, like Kodak losing for digital cameras, that they didn't realize what's going on because they weren't getting information of what's going on from the outside world. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you got so few people, and it might be okay, I think in zombie kind of mode, when things are routine and predictable and you got structures that are set up, things might be okay, but it's when things start changing actually out there and that they can't get all that information in and the people in the center can't process that information. They're only able to deal with kind of what they have, and then they end up like Kodak or many other companies not being able to see it first, not being able to sense it, right? They haven't been able to sense it, they haven't been able to really see it or process it because they've only got so many metrics because their brain is so limited. I think the feedback thing is an interesting here. Information flow does not flow both ways.
Right.
That's an interesting one. It kind of gets pushed
we
out.
We may be telling the top brass of what's going on, but after a while, when they don't do anything, we're going to stop doing that. Okay, and we're just going to say this is just the way it is. Don't be making waves anymore.
Yeah, it's a good point. If it doesn't respond, if you don't get any response back, after a while you stop and you just kind of go into a routine. You dumb down and you get a kind of zombie thing, don't you?
Yeah, it changes from being a linear communication to being a culture throughout the whole organization.
A culture set by, what is the culture? By those people, or what is the culture?
The culture is set by all those people working separately. All those communications are individual communications, but each of them together in aggregate start changing the culture. They don't even know they're doing it, but I think they do over time. Just this repeating, this iterative feedback loop just keeps on changing. It just keeps on transforming the system.
Great, thank you very much, Brian. Let's stay going there. So this one, change. How does change happen? A manager decides. Emergence, the iceberg model. So the iceberg model. Who posted this? Anybody want to say something on that? Transformation is linear and slow. So yeah, looks a lot like this here, doesn't it? We figure out where we want to go and then step. And that works if things are pretty knowable, simple and controllable, but otherwise it's going to have problems. An unexpected crisis happens. So this is how change happens, e.g. COVID forcing them to change. Change by PowerPoints. Yeah.
This actually, I was the one who wrote the iceberg model, and this goes with the change of PowerPoint really well. What I started to see is we are using this linear approach, kind of so John Cotter iceberg model. I have those penguins, and then if I have enough penguins at the end, I save this iceberg. And we're using all those amazing, well-marketed linear tools and now in complex situations, and therefore we constantly crash. And this is kind of this PowerPoint karaoke or template karaoke, how I call it. And so often my fingernails just crawled up when I see that.
It's like incredible complexity gets compressed down and compressed down and compressed down until it's a series of PowerPoint slides. And that's to do with the structure of the whole system, isn't it? It's not necessarily someone wants that. It's actually the whole structure of the system. What's this, Christopher?
I can actually highly recommend this book here. It's a Stanford Briefs, Janisha Garvey-Burher, Unlocking Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps, How to Thrive in Complexity. It's a wonderful book who exactly writes about this. It's brilliant, and integrating consciousness development as well. It's really good books that I can recommend.
Nice. Thank you very much. Within the usual scope, limited possibilities. Limited possibilities. Who is this?
I'm sorry to interrupt. The guy that mentioned the book, can you please type that in the message board?
Yep.
So you can...
Okay.
Thank you.
So no risk taking. Change means breaking a world system, a working system. Okay, it's very conservative system. You're saying no risk taking. People don't want to take risks. Change means breaking a working system. Anybody want to chat on that? Or it's limited to known paradigm. There's never an evolution in the paradigm, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that was me. Actually, they're really thinking about maintaining what is there, and they're not thinking about real change in terms of transitions.
Do you think it's happening nowadays? Do you think there's any opening on that front, or any possibilities you see, or something like that?
Well, I work with international organizations where usually when I teach system thinking, I get about 5 participants, and a few weeks ago I had like 75, because now they're realizing that their ways, their thinking model is not working, it's not going to get there anywhere, so now they're looking for, they're grasping for straws, you know? They're looking for new avenues, new ways of thinking, yeah. So maybe it's changing.
So maybe it's this one here, an unexpected crisis like COVID. Is forcing them. Okay. All right. Strategy. So, what does strategy look like in this linear world? Top-down approach. Executive team creates it. Minimum risk. Okay, that's a bit of a theme here. People don't want to take risks. They can't change the paradigm. Focus on part of the system. Anybody want to talk about that? Copycats, no innovation. Okay, that's a bit of a theme, right? This seems to be a very conservative system, really. From now to the future. Anybody want to talk on this?
I put up that because they're not anticipatory. They project the situation and they look from today to tomorrow. Instead, any effort takes 3 to 5 years to become mature. So you rather plan and create from the conditions that the system will have in 3 to 5 years. But corporations usually, organizations usually think from today plus trends towards tomorrow.
So isn't that also a kind of conservative thing too? They're kind of thinking about where they are and what their next step is, no? Rather than envisioning like 5 years out. And is that
see what the conditions will be then technological social conditions, and what those social functions will be possible to fulfill in a different way.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the thing, that they aren't really kind of reimagining. They don't have the capacity to kind of reimagine things to like new societal functions, as we talked about. Okay, driven by data. Who is this? Driven by data?
Me. I think just sometimes they can get like when a manager's making a decision, it can be really just like one data set, like, okay, the trend's going like this, we need to react in a certain way. And you're not necessarily looking at all of the different parts and people in the system as to like, why is that happening? And maybe we're tackling the problem by going by what data tells us.
Yeah, it's another information compressing problem, isn't it? They're reducing it down to, and often data is just an excuse, isn't it? It's like they pull out the data when it fits their interests quite often too, isn't it? It's actually, there's so many different actual metrics and they're using so few. It's like you could pull a different set of metrics and a different set of data and tell a different story.
totally.
I think that's part of it too. So power bases, A plan from A to B. Planetary issues not taken into account, for sure. Most of the people do not know or understand the strategy. So the information doesn't really get diffused back out to people. Wish list, laundry lists that, I'll just admit these people. Wish list laundry lists that are not aligned with systems dynamics. Who is this?
That was me. And the experience when we're in those strategy processes, we talk about all those tangible and intangible resources that we need in order to be successful, to bridge the gap or to come from A to B or wherever. But we have zero clue about, well, how are those resources or those things or those variables or stocks and flows interconnected. And this is what I mean. We have those long bullet points lists, and then we say, okay, now let's do it. And well, that doesn't, no.
Yeah. They don't actually understand the reality of the system they're dealing with.
Exactly. It's kind of, yeah, it's flying blindfolded in an airplane.
Yeah.
And saying, but I know my buttons. Yeah. You're still blindfolded.
Yeah. And even and as the organizations get bigger, it becomes more and more of a problem, doesn't it? It's like somehow we're maybe able to do 10 people or 20 people, but when we get the European Union or the United Nations or something, those problems just become worse and worse, don't they? There's a bigger and bigger misconnect. So in a way, the organizations that we have really have a scaling problem. Even though we have huge organizations, they don't seem to get better as they get bigger. They seem to almost get worse as they get bigger. And I don't think it necessarily has to be like that. I think that's actually a function of the way we're organizing here. We can talk more about that. Okay, governance, board, executive, team, financial budgets and approvals, organized abandonment, critics are undesired based on self-interest than organizational interest. Perceived scarcity of resources, thus one has to decide who gets access. Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a certain scarcity mindset kind of built into this model, isn't there? It's also kind of a closed system, isn't it? And I think that is what actually drives scarcity mentality, isn't it? If you're closed, then there's only so much, inside this little bubble that we've created, and there's a scarcity. Who's going to get what? Let's argue about that for a long time. Then you're open up to maybe an infinity of possibilities and so forth, and there wouldn't maybe be that same kind of mentality. So it's centralized. Shareholders, CEO make decisions, meritocracy, or more like playing the game to be promoted to managers. Yeah, I was talking to a lady in Hong Kong recently, and she said the kind of culture there is not even one of just wanting to make money or tick boxes. It's actually just one of wanting to please your boss, which is, I don't know, it's an interesting, it's a kind of a bizarre thing. If everyone just goes around trying to please their boss, I mean, imagine how dysfunctional an organization could get over time if it evolved like that. It's like, it's never going to be able to innovate. Like that's the opposite from innovation, isn't it? Anyway, focus on outputs rather than outcomes, task orientated, compartmentalized, without many individuals lacking the bigger picture. Yeah, that's a good point. Who's this? Lacking the bigger picture?
Yeah, it's me.
Yep. What do you mean lacking the bigger picture?
Most of the people in the organization, they do not actually know how their activities are linked with the strategy or on the higher flight levels. So they just most of the activities are broken down to the minimum possible chunks of activity, work. Then there is a very high overhead for managers. I mean, the management itself is the whole overhead, to make sense of all these pieces, bits and pieces by connecting them. And overall, it makes the operations really heavy and, unproductive. So, and also,
Yeah,
I don't understand what's happening.
yeah, yeah. There's a fundamental, people are disconnected from the overall system that they form part of. And that creates a massive amount of problems, doesn't it? They become incentivized in just in their little sphere, right? And we get silos and so forth. And the kind of lack of collective intelligence for sure, right? We're not getting everyone's input on this. Not everyone's able to sense things, what's going on. It's going to create a lot of problems, this, isn't it? Like if people come disconnected from the whole that they're part of, you're going to lose a lot of information, a lot of sense making, a lot of motivation, alignment, and so forth. So it's obviously a big problem. Okay, so let's stay going for the sake of time. So thank you very much for your contribution there. I think that was interesting stuff. We want to talk a bit now about what's changing. We're trying to think about new approaches here. That's what we'll be doing through these sessions. So what does this next evolution in organization potentially look like? We know there are big changes happening out there in the world. We're not the only ones talking about this stuff for sure. There's a lot of people talking about it. We know there are a lot of changes happening in the world that are driving changes in organizations, requiring them to adapt and evolve and so forth. What do they look like? This is Yenia Bar-Yan, president of the New England Center for Complex Systems. He says this: hierarchical systems have really been very successful over history. We had empires, kingdoms, and companies that were very hierarchical, and that seemed to work very well. But it kind of started falling apart by 1980s. And by now, it should be quite apparent that these systems that are hierarchical are just not able to deal with the complexity of the world we're in. And actually, Peter Senge has a similar quote, and he says, this was even back in the 1990s, I think he said it. He said that at this stage, large centralized bureaucratic systems are virtually unmanageable. Pretty strong statement considering most of our world is managed through them, right? And he's saying these things are basically unmanageable at this stage. So decentralized forms of organization have always existed, but they've generally remained local in scope, too difficult to coordinate effectively at a large scale. Today, this dynamic is changing in profound ways since the advent of information technology, the rise of globalization in the mid-20th century. Our economies and societies have been on a long transition process from the well-established hierarchical form of organizations that dominated to new forms of networked organizations. A confluence of new environmental, technological, economic, and social changes are starting to converge in powerful ways, working to erode these well-established centralized patterns of organization and create fertile ground for new forms of distributed organizations. So we may not appreciate it, but we've come a long way since the mid-20th century when it was largely accepted that hierarchies could do everything and should do everything, right? That was really the thinking. If you wanted to do anything in society, you did it through a hierarchy, and your government could basically solve all problems. And if they couldn't solve them, then some corporation could. Today, many people recognize the limitations of those kinds of systems. So actually things have changed massively already, but we know they're going to change in big ways going forwards due to a number of big changes that are happening out there in the world, particularly due to technology. This is a report from Accenture, the consulting company, talking about the rise of platforms and ecosystems. They say this is about maybe 5-10 years ago they wrote this, 81% of industry executives believe that in the future, industry boundaries will be dramatically blurred as platforms reshape industries into interconnected ecosystems. So it's a very different way of talking and thinking about organizations, this new idea of ecosystems, that we may in fact, as a function of connectivity and so forth, be moving from these kind of unicellular, single cellular organisms of the organizations we know into these ecosystems, these multicellular organisms, these huge networks. Sometimes they're called platforms or networks or ecosystems, but they've seen a dramatic rise in the world in the past 20 years or so. And actually these kind of networked organizations are really starting to dominate these days. So there's big changes taking place for sure. I wanted to share this little video with you in respect to networks or this idea of ecosystems as a way of thinking about this. I've just got to share my audio, so give me 1 second there. Here we go. So let's take a little look at this.
In recent years, an important idea has been spreading around the world that businesses of many shapes and sizes can thrive and serve customers better as participants in ecosystems. More collaborative and varied, more adaptive and nimble than traditional industry structures and value chains. Ecosystem is a useful metaphor that points to a deep interdependence across players as they co-evolve and together create and share resources. Everyone contributes, benefits, and is invested in ensuring the sustained success of their collective common interests. Some ecosystems, like learning and wellness, are built around needs and issues, while others, like eBay and Apple, are built on top of powerful platforms that invite the active participation of a large number of other players. Businesses that understand ecosystems and how they work are discovering exhilarating new opportunities to co-create new value with multiple players, often including customers, using the coordinating power of advanced technologies, create, scale, and serve untapped markets faster than ever before. Work with others to meet vital human needs and desires in ways that would be beyond the capacities of any single organization. Attract and activate passionate communities of talented individuals and organizations, and accelerate.
Sorry. So that's a report by Deloitte actually about 10, 15 years ago about the rise of ecosystems as a new way of doing things. I don't want to present this as a solution. These are some of the changes that are happening out there in the world as a function of changes in values, in society, in technology, and so forth. What I want to do now is a similar sort of exercise as before, but as to think about what a new kind of organization might look like. This is a lot of what we'll be exploring in the coming series that we'll talk about. So what is a more holistic way of organizing? What would that look like? What would these new ideas in systems thinking, what would that realize in terms of new ways of organizing? And that's, as I say, we don't expect to have the answer at this stage. It's just posting up your initial thoughts. It's what we will be exploring, as I say, over the coming months as we go through this series. But it'd be great to hear what you're thinking on that already. Similar sort of questions around strategy, around operations or alignment or structure. How does this work in a non-reductionist world, in a holistic approach to organizations? If we could take a few minutes to post up there. Have a quick discussion. We'll go 5-10 minutes over time today because of initial technical problems. Okay, let's jump in, take a look at some of these. If you're still writing, you can stay putting your stickies up whilst I'm talking here. So in terms of strategy, what would a holistic approach to organizations look like? So to work with natural rhythms and cycles, bit of that ecosystem metaphor, to be anti-fragile. Anybody want to talk about this, anti-fragile?
Yes. Well, this is based on Nassim Taleb's work. We're in a complex world where we have to be facing a lot more black swans and a lot more exponential phenomena, and in order to deal with that, we need to create anti-fragile structures.
How?
But then that goes back to the structure, and actually it seems that in nature fractals do work quite well, so we need to stay with fractals. And we're just going the other way these days, which is very interesting, because then we see how the existing system is going down the drain at a fast pace, whereas fractals, emerging fractals, are becoming much more anti-fragile by definition.
Okay, thank you. Emergence, strategy is emergent, empathy, diverse perspectives, OODA loops, keep the planet in mind, multiple strategies at multiple levels, diversity of tactics, coordinated integration. Who's this? Coordinated integration. Patterns of collaboration aligned with objectives. Follow nature, regeneration, and sustainability. Shared vision, shared mindset or paradigm. So shared mindset or paradigm. Who is this? Maybe it's getting to that idea of, like, you know, information processing again, and how we might get collective intelligence. A strategy might be product of a collective intelligence rather than a few people with a few metrics figuring out how to optimize them. Consider negative externalities, conversation, relation, and wisdom of crowd, self-empowered teams, driven by values rather than externalities, agile teams, methodologies, mindsets, enabling system, provide resources for a project to grow, starting conditions over outputs. Anybody want to speak on them?
Sorry, whether it's me again. Well, that's what Dave Snowden talks a lot about it when, you know, in the scope of the Cynefin framework, where if when we're in complex situation or close to chaos or even chaos, we need to ensure we have as many options as possible in the beginning, rather than trying to focus on getting some outputs, because in the end the outputs, we never know what they're going to be, because we're in a complex situation.
Because it's emergent, isn't it? I think that's the idea. When it's emergent, you can't really control or predict it or really know what it is. I think you can create a context, like an overall general maybe idea of where you want to go, and then influence the starting conditions. Maybe it's the bit in between. You can't specify how you're going to get there. I think that's part of it. You give people the flexibility to organize or self-organize in a way towards those kind of general outcomes that you want to see in the system. You might have general principles too. You know, we want a functioning organization or a healthy organization or something. I think, yeah.
Sorry. Actually, Snowden just is going to publish next week, but I'm going to share the link, a European field guide for managing complex situations. And it's just corresponds to what you were just saying, so I'm going to share the link.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's stay going. We haven't done too well with time today. We went over time. Internal markets, this is operations, self-organized, chaos theory, culture, open communications, agile, disruption, and dual transformation. Networks of networks, agile short feedback loops, appropriate methods. What's appropriate methods? Who's this?
I can jump here if you want.
Yep.
So one of the parts is using, we're used to using a lot of methods that just aren't fitted for a systems thinking world, right? And one is the Wardley mapping itself that is portrayed here. So this is one example of a Wardley map. But what it also is that I think we tend to put, for example, agile just as a solution for all in it, rather than looking at what the right context, the state of the system would actually require, right? In some cases, a Six Sigma, like here on the Wardley map, that's why the example is there, might be a lot more or a lot better suited to what the actual purpose is or what is actually being done rather than an agile context.
Yeah, so we have to think about the context that we're in, right? I think that's what David Snowden's talking about too, isn't it? It's like, is this simple? Is it complicated? Is it complex? Or is it totally chaotic? And then we adapt our approaches and methods to that, as you say. Maybe Six Sigma is right in some situations, but obviously not in others. So, and that's an interesting, it's almost a different level of awareness, because at the moment we have to set a solution on everything, don't we? And often that's having the assumption that we're in a simple environment. We don't even stop to think, is this complex?
And are we using the right tools, right? Not just because we like the tools, are they actually fitted for the kind of system that we're looking at and the state that we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that thing with having a hammer, you know, and seeing nails everywhere, doesn't it? And maybe now we're in a world of screws and we need a screwdriver, but firstly, you got to recognize that you're in a world. Well, firstly, you got to recognize that your hammer doesn't work when you got a pile of screws, right? I think that's really the starting thing. And quite often it's experience the problems of trying to bang screws in with hammers, and that's the starting thing. And then you can say, is there a better way? Maybe there's such a thing as a screwdriver, and maybe we can think about, do we have screws or do we have nails here? Should we use a hammer or should we use a screwdriver? I think is what we're getting at. Okay, so people have fluid roles depending on the organization's needs and their skills. Yeah. It's a bit like in holacracy, isn't it? People can be part of different circles, and they can have different roles and so forth. You're not fixed in one, not necessarily fixed in one place in the hierarchy. And a kind of meritocratic system too, that maybe you're good at this thing over here, so in that group you're way up here, but over here you're not so good at that thing, so in that group you're way down here. So there isn't necessarily a fixed place for you in the hierarchy. You adapt, and whether you're way up or way down depends on the context. Again, I think it's context dependent. Okay, so internal markets, self-organized integrated teams of experts who see the whole system, discipline, collaboration. Who is this?
Oh yeah, that was one I put in. This is yeah, it's really about this whole idea that we'll have teams that understand the whole value chain. So there's no longer silos, and yeah, so they kind of function as a whole. Yeah, so there's this kind of collaboration with teams, and all the teams, they know what they need from each other to be able to yeah, to create something from a holistic point of view.
Kind of goes back to information to some extent too. How do we get the right information flows that people know what they need to know without getting overloaded too? Yeah. Okay, so Agile was kind of a big thing that popped out there, little teams, short feedback loops, and self-organizing. Okay, so feedback loops, organizational to local, local to organizational, this macro, micro thing, feedback. So collaboration rather than competition. So how do we get alignment in this organization? Holistic context, balance between hierarchy and teams, vertical and horizontal. Anybody want to talk on that? Goals versus values. Simultaneous real time. Alignment is simultaneous and real time. So feedback is maybe real time. Sociocracy. Anybody want to talk about sociocracy?
It was me. I really like Sociocracy's decision-making model, which is a consent-based model, and it gives the option to give an objection if anyone feels that the rising decision makes any harm for himself or the part or the team where he works or she. So this decision-making model, I think it's closes the distance between alignment and organizing or operations and governance. This sociocracy decision-making model, I think it worth to read about.
Could you share a link? Maybe not everyone is familiar with sociocracy.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's the best. Well, it's the best I've come across. It's very interesting, most advanced one I think I've come across. It's not a new one either. It's been around for a while, right? As a way of designing organizations. Maybe you've heard of holacracy. Sociocracy is kind of came before that. It's a much more open source version.
Yeah, I think it came after holacracy, but yeah, I will share the link in the chat.
Yeah, no, I think if you check the history, sociocracy has been around for a long time, actually. I mean, they're both evolved. They're both evolved from a whole pile of different ideas, so it's not that easy to kind of separate them. But it's actually the history of the ideas that have been around for a long time. Right, generating. So yeah, it'd be good to have a link, because I definitely recommend everyone, if you're not familiar with it, check it out. Generating all the time to achieve alignment internally and with supporting macro systems. Generating all the time to achieve alignment internally and with supporting macro systems. Okay, let it emerge, listen. Holacrical, regenerative living systems based on structure. Anybody want to speak on this? Fractals, flexible. So this is about structure. Power and responsibility are proportional. Power and responsibility are proportional. Anybody? Decentralized governance model. Multi-way communications. Feedback. Getting to the idea of having proper kind of feedback and even really looking at and understanding the feedback dynamics in the system. Networks of teams inside and outside the organization. Processes are dynamic, global and local, and integrated. Global and local, integrated and integrated. The forest and the trees and the emergent conditions. And questions for a holistic system. How does in-reach and inclusivity involve marginalized communities that incorporate agent-based community development practices that are distrustful of large outside entities imposing solutions because of history and preponderance of applications, etc. Adverse childhood experience, ACE. Okay. So multi-way communications, decentralized governments, and simplified dynamic AI, constantly changing, focused on human relationships. All right, guys, let's leave it there for now and wrap up. Well done. I think we started a very big, broad discussion and touched upon a lot of kind of the key stuff that we'll try and explore in the coming sessions. Yeah, that was just to get us started, get an idea of what we're talking about here, right? Trying to shift from the kind of organizations we know, the linear model, it goes back to this, right? Doing systems innovation in terms of shifting from something linear, both in our thinking and our organizing, to something non-linear and emergent and networked, and a whole cosmos of ideas to explore there. So we'll be talking about them as we go through. Hopefully we'll be doing a monthly, should be doing a monthly session like this. So hopefully you'll join us all again next month. I'll post an event on the website and talk to you all then. I'll post we have a YouTube channel, and I'll do recordings of this and post them there. And if you haven't seen it yet, we have this here, our community for the SI organizations. This is where we collect all the people who are interested in what we're talking about today. I'll share this link with you so you can join. We can keep you updated as we go along. Okay, guys, great talking to you and having your feedback. And I'll see you all again next time. Take care.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
You. Bye.